Hi guys, it's Brooke here. I have a super quick favor to ask. When you have a moment, please take just a second to give this podcast a 5-star review. This will help me to continue the podcast and continue to bring these resources to the community. Thank you so much for that 5-star review.
I cannot tell you how many kids I've met where they say, well, they only say single words except for I want apple. And that's the only phrase they know how to say. And
Mm,
essentially, they've only been taught exactly what to do and say, and they haven't made any mental connections, so they can't really grow through the stages. Stage four is really that's where your typical strategies will start to work. So stage
okay.
four is where, you know, modeling, like, oh, where's the frog? There it is. Let's go get some cookies. Oh, like stage four is where you can essentially use declarative language, self-narration, modeling in just the most natural way, and they will start growing from there.
All right, I'm super excited about our topic today. And today we're going to be talking about Gestalt language processing. And this is somewhat new to me over the last year or so. I've been learning about it, and it's going to be a real treat to have our guest today talk about it and her experience and knowledge. She has a wealth of knowledge. She shared a lot of information with me in the past, and I'm just so grateful that she's here today with us. And I'm going to go ahead and read her bio first, and then we'll get started into our discussion. So today we have Lauren Conley, and she is a bilingual speech language pathologist and an RDI Program Certified Consultant. And she worked in early intervention for over 10 years and now works for a neurodiverse affirming virtual company where she supports individuals with AAC. She is also certified in supporting Gestalt language processors through the Meaningful Speech course. And Lauren has a 4-year-old daughter, Eva, who was diagnosed as autistic when she was 2 years old and is a Gestalt language speaker. So welcome, Lauren. Thank you so much for being on today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. Well, let's get started. Let's dive in. So we'll go ahead and just start with talking about what Gestalt language processing is in simple terms. If you can give our listeners just a general overview of what it is.
Absolutely. And actually, I just want to start by saying it's okay if you pronounce it Gestalt or Gestalt. I have families that say, oh my God, I'm saying this wrong. And it's, everyone says it a little bit differently. I usually say Gestalt language processing. And really, the best way to think about it is there are two pathways to learning language when you are young. You can learn it the typical way or the analytical way, which is you start with sounds. You're babbling mama, mama, ma, that shapes into mama, one of your first words, or ba shapes into ball. Then you start putting words together, my ball, go ball, kick ball, and you're combining phrases. And then suddenly you're producing full sentences, you're adding in your grammar, and you're a full language communicator. So that's the way that was the only way I was taught as a speech language pathologist in graduate school, that you start at the simplest units and you work your way up. But now that I've gotten the training for Gestalt language processing and I've seen it in my own child, it's really amazing that there is another way to learn language. And it's kind of a little bit backwards. So you start by learning a full long chunk. We call those gestalts. So it's a stream of sounds and the child picks it up. They hear those sounds, they learn it. It was meaningful for them. It was in a context, or it was said in a sing-song way. Think of a kid like reciting Wheels on the Bus over and over again. Do they understand every part of that song, every word? No, but they know like they're singing this favorite song that they have heard before. So that's a gestalt. And it is then mitigated. These long gestalts, they can be songs, it could be a phrase like see you later, that's like a gestalt. So we use gestalts actually. So like when you say like have a good day, you too, you're actually tuning in to these just memorized phrases, but we know what each word means. When you're a child, you don't. So we start with these long chunks and then we start mitigating these chunks. They start taking bits of it and separating it out. And then they start isolating single words and understanding that word means this is cat. and this is go. And if I put these two words together, well, that's a phrase. And actually, that's not the best example because in stage three, it's typically not even going to be a verb. It's going to be an adjective, mama
Mhm.
cat, that's mama's cat, or daddy shoe. It was a lot of possessions, actually, daddy shoe, mommy shoe, baby shoe. And so they start learning that you can put words together in different ways and they have different meanings. And I'll talk about the different stages, and then finally they do catch up. They go to stage four, stage five, and six where they're now able to put together their own sentences.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And I imagine that, can be really confusing for Gestalt language processors if they don't have a trained professional or, somebody really understanding how they're processing information. So I'd love to talk a little bit about, some common myths and misconceptions that people have about children who are Gestalt language processors and kind of what you hear in the field. And if you could share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's actually three myths and misconceptions that I want to talk about. The first one is the most common that, oh, this child is walking around babbling and it's meaningful, or it's not meaningful at all. It's meaningless. They're just saying, ada gotta goo, ada gotta goo. And what does that mean? Or, zi, zi. My daughter used to walk around walking in a circle, just walking around the house going, zi, zi. And she had been born 5 years earlier or 10 years earlier. They would have just said, it's meaningless. She's just making sounds. And I think that since I've learned about Gestalt language processing and I was so blessed to learn about it when she was that age, I knew that it was meaningful. I knew that she was rehearsing something that was meaningful to her, something that she had heard somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
and even if she didn't know what it meant, that was putting her on course. I actually later found out what that meant. So we used to take our walks and I would talk to her on our walks and she wouldn't respond like, oh, look at that squirrel, oh, what
Mm-hmm.
do you see over there? And, no response. She didn't know how to look at something if I pointed. So I felt like I just want to connect to her. I just want to do something. So on our daily walks, I would see a tree and I would say, touch a tree. And I would touch it. And then I would bring her close and then she would touch it. Oh, touch a tree. And I would touch it. And then she would touch it. So one day we were passing a tree and she went, and then she touched it. So
Mm.
what was she walking around saying? She was saying, which was touch a tree. And
Mm-hmm.
then as soon as I said touch a tree, she looked at me like, oh, you understand me. So that was really
Oh.
amazing that she was saying meaningful things. So always be a detective. That's really the biggest myth that people would have said before Gestalt. And one reason why I think it's so important because a lot of speech therapists are like, well, this isn't important, but it is because without it, you might not think that your child is learning language, and they really are. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the biggest one. The other two is don't take the Gestalt literally. I mean, touch a tree was literal, but there's a lot of Gestalts that kids might use that aren't exactly what they mean to say. So if they say I want to go home, that might not mean they want to go home. They might mean that something's uncomfortable or they need help or they don't like something. So, take the context of the Gestalt without taking every word at its value. And another example of this, and this is even for older individuals, when they say something like, I have one client who says, Grandma, 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 and her parents are like, oh, it's an
Okay.
apraxic tick. She's just saying Grandma, Grandma. I don't know why she's just saying it. But then when I was talking to them more, I helped them realize that she might have questions that she doesn't know how to ask. So when you're a Gestalt language processor, you might say one word or a phrase, but there's other things you want to talk about underneath that word. I have an example where I worked with a fully grown individual. He uses ASL for his primary language, and
Mm-hmm.
he would ask his dad every Sunday, are you going to church? And his dad would say, yes. And he would say, are you going to church? And his dad would say, yes. And he would say, are you going to church? And his dad's like, Lauren, this is so frustrating. He asks me, are you going to church? And I tell him, yes. And then he just asks me the same question again. Why is
Hmm.
he doing that? And I said, I bet he's wanting to ask you something else, but that's the only gestalt for this context he knows. What else could he be wondering? And the dad thought about it and said, well, sometimes after church, I come home with McDonald's and sometimes I don't. So I'm like, well, next time, let him know what you're going to do. So sure enough, he asked his dad, are you going to church? And his dad said, I'm going to church and I'm bringing home McDonald's. And guess what? His son did not ask a follow-up question. He got his answer.
Wow, that's amazing. That's incredible. I mean, just for you to be able to give him that feedback and then for his dad to intuitively think about what he might be asking. I mean, what a special moment for that child to feel heard, to feel like they got to the bottom of it, what he was wondering about.
Exactly. And that's what I always think is like there's so much locked in curiosity and wondering and language that we only get a tiny bit of when they're a Gestalt language processor. So we really have to be a detective and think what else is it that they're trying to say.
Right. I love that. That's so important. So I'm so glad you shared that. Did you have other myths or misconceptions you wanted to share?
Yeah, the last one is that just because they're at stage 4, just because they're starting to put their own sentences together, doesn't mean that they won't still use gestalts. So that was, I think, a big like misconception to me when I went through the meaningful speech course was it made it seem like once you're at stage 4, you're going to have a typical trajectory just like any other child. But you're still a
Mhm.
Gestalt language processor. You're still going to, in a way, learn gestalts from stage 1 and then work through them at the different levels as you learn new concepts. So you're never like not a Gestalt language processor if that's how you started, because that's still probably going to help you as you learn new language.
That's interesting. Well, I'm excited to dive into the levels. I know you've mentioned them a few times, so we're going to get there in a minute, and then we can talk more about what that looks like when they're at higher levels in this process. And I know you did talk a little bit about why it's so important to have awareness around, how to support a GLP and why it's important to have a therapist that's trained. But if you could touch a little bit more on why this is so significant, that would be super helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So when Eva, my daughter, was first diagnosed, we started with speech, we started with ABA as well. And I remember some of the goals, especially in ABA, they wanted to work on echoics. Okay, we want to teach your daughter to say the word hop. Now, first of all, from a speech therapy standpoint, I'm like, well, she can't make the H sound or the P sound. So I feel like this is a hard ask for her. But they also wanted to teach the word just by like, here's a picture of hopping, a bunny hopping, or here's a picture of, and we want you to just repeat after me, hop. And the thing is with Gestalt, yes, they repeat things, but they repeat something because it's meaningful to them.
Right.
And it has some sort of trigger in the brain that goes, ooh, that's enticing. That language is meaningful and interesting and prosodic. And I think that all speech therapists should know how to capitalize on those kids' interests and teach language, not just like, hey, this is a water bottle, say water bottle, water bottle. Like, that's not how Gestalt language processor is going to learn. And that's how most parents and therapists think that that's how you teach kids words. You just go around and you label things. And that's why it's just so important to know that these kids are just going to learn differently. And if you don't know that, then you're not going to get very far.
Okay, well, let's talk about what to look for. And so let's begin with the levels. So I think the levels really bring it to life of, what this looks like for these individuals and, how this progresses through the different levels.
Absolutely. So, level 1 is your full chunks, your gestalts. You might call it echolalia. This is where they take full chunks of information from what you say in your daily routine, things like time to go, put on her shoes, things that they hear on the TV, songs, what teachers say, everyone line up at the door. Those are some really good, like, first gestalts that your child's going to hear. And that's level 1 is just collecting language. And interesting thing about level one is your child will most likely not be saying these very clearly. So if for touch a tree is any indicator, level one gestalts might just sound like babbling and jargon. And so
Okay.
we really have to be a detective at level one. And it's the hardest level really because the child might be pre-verbal. If they don't talk, we can look at AAC, which I'll talk about later. But this is just where we're just trying to grow how many words and how many gestalts that child can have. So that's level one, is just growing the list and having chunks. Now, also interesting about that is you could have one word chunks. So a lot of people get confused where they say, well, my child knows how to label every animal. Like my daughter learned like her version for every animal. So for instance, elephant was, that was elephant. And if I said, what's that? She would say, "Ooh." And if she saw one, she would also say it. So, but that was her gestalt for elephant because it never turned into a phrase. That's the real big indicator. If you say cat, but you don't say go cat or cute cat or my cat or it's a cat and it's just cat, then that's a gestalt, even though it's one word. So the next stage is the kind of that mitigated stage. So this is when you mix and match. For my daughter, this is where she would like begin to mix and match a word in her song. So any Lori Berkner fans out there, we're a big fan, but there's a song where I would sing it to her and I would put any toy on my head and I would say, Mama has a bottle on my head. Mama has a bottle on my head. I keep it there all day. Achoo, and I would sneeze it off and she would think it's hilarious and she would sing it not very clearly, like Mama ed, Mama ed. So it was a gestalt, but a lot of the words weren't very clear. Once she entered stage two, I could distinctly hear her changing out the word for what was on your head. So, but it was always mama. So mama has a ball on her head. Mama has a shoe on her head. So stage two is where you get to start mixing and matching. Hi, mama. Hi, dada. You get to put in some of that different information, but there's still gestalts. And the way that that's different from just like a typical phrase again is you're putting two units of information together. You're not actually able to just keep building like little building blocks, and any grammar that's there was modeled. It was not like grammar that she's putting in on her own. So some kids at stage two might sound fully verbal and they might have like, and you're like, whoa, but they're actually still at stage two because they're just repeating and chunking. Some kids at stage two, might just have a few still very sing-song and very phrase-like, but they're starting to put more vocabulary in there. So it just depends. This could take a while at stage two.
Okay. All right. So at this point, they are still relying on others to help them with the intermixing of the gestalts.
Yeah, they need a lot
They
of
can accept
modeling.
it.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay. And I'm assuming that as you go through these stages, it's very different for every child when they move through the stages and how quickly they do. And I guess it's probably how much opportunities they have too. I bet that's part
It
of
is
what
unfortunately very hard to
varies.
tell. It's very different for each child. I will say that some people, and I've definitely been guilty of this, you get so excited you want to jump into stage two as soon as you can, but then you can get stuck there because you really just needed a whole lot more gestalts at stage one. So sometimes they're kind of in between stages, and you typically say that you're a new stage once you're over 50% in that stage. So if they're no utterances, I would say, as a speech therapist, are over 50% at that new level, then okay, they're a stage two. They still have some stage one. And just again, another myth is that you would just be in one stage at a time. But the truth is, you can have gestalts of all different stages at the same time. It's just where are you primarily?
I see. So they can have like, what'd you call that? Like a splinter skill type of thing where you can have abilities, but you're not fully integrated into one. It would be the lowest stage, right? I mean, you just wouldn't get past that lowest stage that you're at. Is
You
that
have
how
to
that
be,
would
yeah,
work?
over 50. Exactly. You might have a
Yeah.
few stage two, but you're not really there yet until that's your kind of primary. You're over 50%.
Got it. Okay. Okay, let's go to stage three.
So stage three is where you can start working on like referential language, pointing, joint attention, single words. That's where you get to start going, look, squirrel.
Uh-huh.
It's a really fun stage where you teach single words and two-word phrases. You can play games like memory, oh, two dogs, big dog, small dog. You get to use a
Mm.
lot of nouns and adjectives. So you don't use a lot of verbs yet. And I think that's like the big misconception. So like if you say like go dog, that's kind of still a gestalt. Go dog, ready, set, go. Mama's jumping. Those are kind of going to be more level one and level two gestalts. But level three is where you start mixing and matching nouns and adjectives, and you start pointing and talking about things in their environment.
Okay. And are they still relying on the modeling or are they contributing in that stage?
I mean, really at all stages, they hear the model naturally. We don't want to say this, but we're modeling
Right.
very naturally next to them. And then typically we'll see in all the stages that they're going to use that language on their own as it becomes familiar to them. So
Mm-hmm.
I would say, yeah, I mean, they're definitely going to start going like dog, big dog, and you start hearing some of those combinations on their own.
Okay, great. It's just that they're relying on what was modeled for them. Is that what the difference is? That they haven't generated their own idea around it or in the stage or can they?
They're starting to in this state. You're right. They
Okay.
are starting to put two words together on their own instead of having it be a gestalt.
Got it. Okay. And you mentioned something important. You said you don't want to say dog. Let's just talk about that for a moment and why that's important not to prompt in that way.
Absolutely. So if we teach a child to every time they want something, okay, you say, I want an apple, you're essentially teaching like a stuck gestalt because they kind of learn it's like prompt dependency. They learn, okay, I'll do what you want, but I don't really get why. Versus with following these Gestalt language processing different stages, the child starts to unravel what language is and how it's used. It's very natural. You're modeling as you're going through the day, oh, I want a pickle, I want a carrot, give me some yummy apples. And you're modeling a variety of language. And that's the beauty of it. That's why you need level one, because they need the variety. What happens is
Right.
if they're taught in speech therapy or is ever teaching them to say, I want an apple, they are stuck there. And I cannot tell you how many kids I've met where they say, well, they only say single words except for I want apple. And that's the only phrase they know how to say. And
Mm.
essentially, they've only been taught exactly what to do and say, and they haven't made any mental connections. So they can't really grow through the stages.
Mm, that's really significant. I'm glad that you shared that. I think that's so important because it's so tempting for parents and professionals to use that prompt. And we know with our training in RDI that that's something that we try to stay away from too. But this is even more meaningful in this case. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so let's go back to the stages. So we ended with stage three, and so let's go to stage four.
Yeah, stage four is really that's where your typical strategies will start to work. So stage
Okay.
four is where, you know, modeling, like, oh, where's the frog? There it is. Let's go get some cookies. Oh, like stage four is where you can essentially use declarative language, self-narration, modeling in just the most natural way, and they will start growing from there. You can also work with a speech therapist and you can work on different pictures of different pronouns. He is a boy, she is a girl. Let's compare and contrast. You can start focusing on activities that work on negative. The frog is not under the tree, the frog is not under the bus, and they start learning the grammar. Simple
Mhm.
grammar. They start learning verbs at stage four. They start learning like he is walking, he is jumping, he goes, she doesn't go. They learn all those parts of language. So stage 4 is essentially them putting together their own sentences. And it's really exciting when you hear your child say a sentence that is ungrammatical, like him got toys, because that tells you that they are putting the words together on their own. They are trying to make sense of language, trying to make sense of the rules. And I hear this in my own daughter when she's like, what was it? She said something the other day and I should have written it down, but she's like, I'm so hungry, which is a gestalt. I'm so hungry. I don't pouch, no, no, no pouch. The pizza, no. It's want cake, like she's just like trying to like work through like explaining to me exactly what she doesn't want and what she does want. And I just loved hearing her ungrammatical sentence.
It's the best, isn't it? And it's really coming from their own thought process.
Mhm.
And it makes me think of a client I had years ago that this was so many years ago. We didn't know about this at the time, but she was an RDI client and she had beautiful scripts. I mean, she knew how to put these gestalts into the perfect moments and it was appropriate, and she'd pull them from TV shows or, different things that she heard and the environment and knew how to place them appropriately. And then we started to hear all of these grammatical errors, and we knew that it was coming from her own thought process. And I just remember celebrating with her parents that, oh, look at those errors. It's coming from her. She's really thinking it through and thinking about what she wants to say and how to say it. And it was fantastic. And then she moved on from, beyond that and was able to correct those errors. So it's a fascinating process to watch. And had I known at the time, I would have understood it better. I just was really excited that we were seeing this unfold through the work that we were doing, but we weren't specifically doing speech therapy. But yeah,
No,
it was
that's a great
great.
story. No, that's wonderful. Thanks for sharing, like just seeing like that stage of like celebrating. Yes, she's thinking of it herself. She's putting it together. That's really exciting.
Yeah, that's what we want for all of us, right? Our own thought process and the ability to communicate what we're thinking about. And I think that's it's a quality of life marker. It's so important. And to have that confidence, to see the kids go through that experience and have confidence in their own communication is so powerful. So fantastic. Well, let's go on to, I don't actually know how many stages there are, so I'm just going to keep going,
Oh,
but we'll
yeah.
go to
So
stage 5.
so stage 4 through 6, we just
Okay.
like learning grammar is stage 4 through 6. So each stage you just are hitting different milestones in your grammar. So usually they are chunked together. So but once you've hit stage 4, you are putting your own sentences together. Stage 5, you're doing more advanced grammar. And then stage 6 is you're really just final tweaks, but you're able to communicate in full sentences.
This show is brought to you by Therapeutic Approach to Growth. Therapeutic Approach to Growth helps families with relationship and behavioral needs. Their holistic programs are individualized to honor and respect each family and their autistic son or daughter's sense of self through programs such as relationship development intervention, naturalistic ABA, and animal-assisted services. If you're finding yourself frustrated or discouraged with your current behavioral programs and would like to see more long-term meaningful growth for you and your family, then contact TAG today at www.tagforgrowth, that's TAGFORGROWTH.com, to learn more about how to schedule a consultation or how they can offer you the help your family needs, whether in person, remotely, or in a school setting. Again, that's www.tagforgrowth.com.
Okay, great. And is that the end? Is that stage 6 is the final stage?
Yep, that's it.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so let's talk about echolalia and scripting and how this fits into Gestalt language processing and the framework.
Yeah, absolutely. So it kind of brings you back to like stage 1, where someone's saying, "Oh, that child's scripting," or they have echolalia, and that's how I learned about it in graduate school as well. Oh, they're autistic kids script, and we saw that as a behavior. So just like kind of a reminder that it's not a behavior, it is a step in their process to learning language. And the most important thing we can do is learn their scripts, learn it with them. And if you want, I can kind of talk about how to help the child at each of the levels, if now would be
Sure. Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, great. So kind of going through each level, level one, they're scripting, they have echolalia, they're saying things under their breath that you can't quite hear. You don't know what it is. I tell the families I work with, video record it if you can, come back to it, show people in the family, get everyone on board. So really, if your child is level one, the best thing you can do for your child is sit down and watch the TV they watch. That's kind of a joke, but it's true. Like, see what
Mhm.
language are they hearing? What TV shows are they watching? What are the teachers saying at school? What do the grandparents say? What do you say? Be aware of what language is coming in. What
Mhm.
language are they hearing? Because that's going to be your best way to detect and figure out what they're saying. And this
Mhm.
is a hard thing. There's always I remember when I was in that place and I wanted to know what she was hearing at school and I felt weird to ask, but looking back, it's like, why did I feel weird? You just ask people, like, what are things you say on the day on the regular teachers, line up at the door, whatever it is, and definitely watch those shows with them because I've worked with many parents that say, oh, they watch this all day. And I'm like, oh, what do they say in that show? And the parents like, I have no idea. Well, if they're at
Mhm.
stage one, it's kind of up to us to know that language. Once we know where this language can be coming from, then when they're mumbling under their breath or they're scripting or they're saying sometimes just vowel sounds. I worked with many children who are autistic in level one. It's just prosody. They're intonation babies. It's like humming. And that's how my daughter was. She barely had any consonants. But then you start hearing some of the sounds and you realize I used to tell her that's a good idea when my daughter, this is also from RDI, but I feel like she would like try to climb something, then she would pause and use her other foot. And I would say, that's a good idea. And then I
Mhm.
remember later I heard her saying, digga digga dia, digga digga dia.
Uh-huh.
Oh, she's saying that's a good idea, but it was like digga digga dia. So, anyways, it's
Mhm.
a fun stage if you let it be and you learn their language, say it back to them. Oh, you said that's a good idea. And I swear they will look at you like you understood me. And
Aw.
it's incredible. If they're singing a song to themselves, sing it with them, join them. Don't be afraid. 1 out of 10 kids might hate it, but the other 9 out of 10 will
Yeah.
love it. So, you'll every now and then you get that kid that hates adults singing. But most times when I encourage parents to do it, it turns out really well and they get to share that moment. So learn your child's gestalts, model your child's gestalts. And then the last thing in stage one is model gestalts with different pragmatic qualities. So you're going to model gestalts that are for advocating purposes, right? So if your child pushes you away, instead of just responding and saying like, oh, what are you doing? Or why are you pushing me away? Don't ask questions. That's another
Mhm.
thing. Stage one, do not ask any questions. Honestly, it's not going to get you anywhere. Just model Gestalt. So if they push you away, then you can say, oh, go away, mama. Okay, go away, mama. I understand.
Mhm.
Sometimes I change my voice to kind of show that I'm talking in their point of view. If they don't want to eat their food instead of saying, why aren't you eating your food? Or do you want to eat your grapes? You could just,
Right.
again, narrate what it is they're doing. So you say, oh, eat grapes, yummy. Or no, 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 no grapes. Add that
Mhm.
sing-song quality to it. So instead of just no grapes, I worked with a speech therapist who used to like model. She's like, yeah, you have to be very simple with these kids, she told me. You have to be very simple and very direct. And she told me, so what I do is I say, no grapes, water bottle down. Oh,
Mm.
please don't do that. So you do not need to be simple in a robotic way. You actually need to quite be the opposite. Add sing song. I got a bottle. Make it enticing for their brain because that's what they're going to latch on to. And that's
Mhm.
what's going to help the most. So, in summary, be a detective, do not ask questions, model with a sing-song quality, and model different pragmatic areas of language. So, like advocating, asking questions, like you might rhetorically ask in your child's point of view, what's this? but you're not actually asking your child. You might model things for your child, such as commenting, that's a one of them was that's a yummy snack. That was one of my daughter's first gestalts. That's a
Mm.
yummy snack. And oh, once she learned it, like that's a yummy snack. Like it was so cute. So again, like you want to model different parts of language, not just saying I want snack. Like there's so much more to
Yes.
language than just requesting.
Yes, I think that's so important, that dynamic communication that you're striving for. And I think that's also something that happens a lot, in the field where there's a lot of repeating of the same phrases. And this is really what you want to stay away from. You want to really encourage a much more rich communication environment. I
Absolutely.
love it. Fantastic. Okay, so now, were there other types of suggestions that you had for some of the other stages?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So that's stage one, which is probably the most important stage to have a GLP, specialized speech language pathologist, so that you don't miss it. Stage two is where you mix and match. And I think the most important thing about helping a child move into stage two and advance their stage two is, again, know what their gestalts are. So the more you know what language your child likes to use and like the examples just also they know, the more that you're going to be able to help them mix and match. So know their favorite songs, know all that content, and then model mix and matching it yourself. And this actually comes much more naturally than you would think if it's your own child. So once you know their language, it actually is quite natural to just mix and match it naturally. That's a yummy snack. That's a yummy banana snack. That's a yummy pretzel snack. Like it just becomes really easy to add words to it to mix and match. Or that's a pretty ball. That's whatever you might want to say, you can take their information and put it together. So I would actually say like stage two is the most fun stage once your child's there, as long as you know what kind of language they have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, great. Okay, let's talk about some tips for stage three.
Stage three is the pointing stage. So take your child to the zoo, go on walks, get out of the house. This is like the stage where one of my favorite routines to do is to walk with a child and then get down at their level, put my arm out and say, stop. And then I go, look, and I point. And I was doing this with one of the clients I work with here in person. And after like 2 weeks, I noticed she was pointing more and then her language was growing. And it's just so cool to watch. So at this stage, point, label, have fun teaching things in your environment, compare and contrast, big dog, small dog. And yeah, mostly just think to yourself nouns and adjectives, and that's really going to help them there.
And you're still in the place, and I think it's the whole way through, but it's probably so important to reiterate that you're not asking questions. You're really modeling.
Now, stage three, so that's a really good point. Stage three is where you can start to ask questions.
Okay.
So stage one and stage two, you will not get very far asking questions, especially for teaching language. Some kids, like if you say, do you want an apple? They might like reach for it, but they're not going to answer your question. Stage three is where yes and no can start as well.
Okay.
Do you want an apple? Yes. Stage three, what's that? An elephant. Stage three is where you could start asking questions.
Okay. Okay. Good to know. Okay. Great. Okay. And now let's go to stage four. It would be the same thing 4 through 6, or would they each have their own kind of
Four
tips?
through six. Yeah, you can just kind of lump them together. The main important thing about those stages is that you are modeling different grammar in different ways. This is where you can take your child to a speech therapist, honestly. Once they're at stage four, you just have to see what areas are hard for them. For my daughter, it's pronouns. So then you work on like, oh, he wants this, but she does not. I have this and you do not. You can just target different grammatical areas and make that a focus. Talk about the past tense. He was, he is. Read books, So I'd say like for parents, stage 4, you would treat it just like any other child, except the misconception that they're going to be 100% at stage 4, and that's just not going to be true. Your child's going to have stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4 all at the same time, but they are able to put their own sentences together. What that means is that if they learn a new concept, they might still start at stage 1, and then you might still need to mitigate it and help them with that new concept up to stage 4. So I'm not saying you're done with the first Gestalt stage. My daughter, she's at stage 5. She's learning a lot of grammar, but she still uses a ton of stage 1 gestalts, and they make her really happy. And you still have to remember that there's so much that they're not saying. My daughter will talk endlessly about how the horsey pooped in the grass. Like that's one of the horsey pooped in the grass, and she chuckles. She wants me to laugh because she thought it was just the most hilarious thing I've ever said. And she's stuck in it, and but I can make it a conversation. I can expand. Oh, the horsey did not poop in the potty like you did, and then she'll talk about how she poops in the potty, and and so just remember that they still won't be talking like a typical child. They're still going to have their own way, and we still have to support them there.
Yeah, that's so significant. I hadn't kind of fully processed what you had shared earlier. That makes a lot of sense. So when there's new gestalts and they go through the whole process from the beginning, and is that always the case? Like where you started, or not
I
always?
feel like that's just been, I mean, when I did the meaningful speech course training, I was very much like, great, you get them to stage 4, they're good to go. But in my experience with my daughter and a lot of the clients I work with, I just see them able to put their own sentences together, but then they also rely on those earlier gestalts as like a starting point. And I think it helps with concepts of emotions, especially. My daughter does a lot of gestalts from emotional times, and then we kind of have to like unpack it. So I think it's always important to know these different levels. I've worked with some kids though that they are fully verbal, like they are full sentences. So I do think every child's just going to be a little bit different with
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. So you really have to individualize it for each child and understand and know your child and how they process. So how can parents or caregivers, understand or determine if their child is a Gestalt language processor?
Absolutely. So most children who are diagnosed as autistic at a young age are going to be Gestalt language processor. Now, I definitely know individuals who are later diagnosed as autistic, more like autistic level 1, who are not Gestalt language processors. So you're definitely not going to say that every autistic individual is a Gestalt language processor. But typically every young autistic individual that I've ever met has been. And you can tell because you can certainly tell at level 1 because they're not talking in a way that you would
Right.
expect them to talk. Now, how can you tell if a 2-year-old is a Gestalt language processor versus a typical speaker? One big tell is using the trifecta of speech. The trifecta being they look at you, they use gestures, and they talk all at the same time. So the eye gaze, the gesture, and the talking all at the same time. Typically not a Gestalt language processor, typically not autistic. So if they're able to go, oh, look, they look at
Right.
you, they visually reference you, they're typically not going to be Gestalt. But if they're just saying like cat in a tree, cat in a tree, cat in a tree, they're probably going to be Gestalt language processor. So there's no easy way to
Okay.
tell for certain, but that's typically how I look at it. As far as like a child that's highly verbal, you have to just start thinking like, are they putting their sentences together? I worked with one girl who is very verbal. She can put together very adult-like speech. But then we started realizing that these were actually learned phrases. And if she had a really hard time coming up with her own language, especially when talking about stories, when she had to think about something, answer questions in her own way. So then we were kind of working through the Gestalt language stages with her as well.
Interesting. Wow. And is there an actual diagnosis? It's not there's no formal diagnosis, right?
No, and there's a lot of, conflict, I think, in the speech therapy community. Not a lot, but there's some conflict about it because, there's certainly research on it, but there's no specific diagnosis for it. But again, like being a parent, of someone who's a
Hmm.
Gestalt language processor, I'll just say that thank God for it because it made me feel so much more empowered that I was helping her through the stages than looking at her speech as broken. Because I think those are our
Hmm.
two options. We either look
Yeah.
at our kid's speech as broken. Why is she repeating this? Like, if I were to think,
Right.
why is she saying the horsey pooped in the grass over and over and over and over again? You would think, like, what's wrong with my kid? Why are they doing this? But if you look at it through a Gestalt lens, she is taking a piece of language that was interesting to her and a joke that was interesting, and it's a place we can expand on and a place we can
Hmm.
learn off of. And I think it
Right.
gives you so much hope, and I really have seen so much progress from it. So I will say
Yeah.
that it's something I care about deeply.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, you've seen it personally and in your own work, and you've seen the success of going through the process, and it makes so much sense. And it's amazing that and wonderful that it has become more known, in the autism community. So I'm grateful for that, and I'm glad I'm so grateful that you're here today sharing this information because it just needs to get out there more. And I'd love to talk a little bit about how this applies to those that use AAC devices.
Absolutely. So it's something we work on every day in my team. Like, how can we make our AAC devices more useful for our Gestalt language processors? And we learn new things every day. So I can't say we have it
Mhm.
totally figured out, but typically what you want to do is take their app of choice. I really like Touch Chat is one of my favorites, and Proloquo to Go are two really good ones. And I create pages for them with their gestalts in it. So I might create pages for their favorite words that have to do with Bluey. I mean, really, their interests are going to be based on their communication is going to be based on their interest. And I think that with AAC, there's two parts of it. One part is the programming, but the other part is what we're modeling. And
Mhm.
as much as I value core word modeling, and I really do value that, I know with my daughter, when I taught her using AAC, she was most interested to talk about her special interests. And they
Mhm.
typically were phrases that I would program. So I created an emotion page. And instead of the emotions saying happy, sad, mad, I used a gestalt for her emotions. So she knew the song from Super Simple Songs, happy, happy, happy. So I recorded my voice saying happy, happy, happy in that way. And she was just tickled to pieces. She also loved pressing the buttons for all of her favorite characters, Elsa, Anna, Olaf, and she was tickled. Those weren't gestalts, those were kind of one word gestalts in a way. But when you're working with a GLP, with AAC, you have to think of their interests, and you might not be focusing on asking for help or asking for a cookie. You might be focusing on talking about poop, for instance,
Yeah.
like the girl who just also loved that, like that humor. And that's what you're going to use the AAC to work on. But then you also
Mhm.
should program gestalts into their device so they have access to those as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's where it would probably be really helpful to have a therapist that is knowledgeable too, kind of what would be good and why it would be good.
Yes, one size does not fit all. So, like, just saying generically, like, download this board and model is not the only thing you need to do when you have a Gestalt language processor. You do need someone who's knowledgeable about Gestalt language processing and knowledgeable about like how to encourage that child to do something hard, which is like looking at those buttons and communicating, and how to
Hmm.
make it meaningful for their brain. This is from another speech therapist who called it like the brain tingles. It's something that makes the brain light up and go, "Ooh, that's fun." That's what you want to program into the device. So we spend a lot of time like programming like yeah, like Bluey boards and Paw Patrol boards and like things that they're going to want to talk about.
And you're using those in those moments, you're using those devices to have that interaction with the child, right? It's not like I mean, I suppose they could use it on their own, but it also is a platform to have that back and forth exchange.
Absolutely. I mean, you can actually, one thing I really love to do as well with Gestalt language processing is teaching, and this is from RDI as well, teaching different frameworks that are predictable. So I think they actually go really well hand in hand because if you're a Gestalt language processor, that means you view things as predictable. You know, this
Mhm.
language, you heard it once this way, so that's the way you expect it to go. Well, socializing is very unpredictable. Playing with
Mhm.
other people is extremely overwhelming and unpredictable. So if you create predictable frameworks like singing, Mommy has a cup on her head, and then achoo, or ring around the rosy, and everyone falls down, suddenly you've
Mhm.
created a social experience that is quite predictable. So
Mhm.
using Gestalt to creating predictability, and then your child can participate in it, and AAC can really support that. So one thing I'd like to do too is open up the body parts page, and then I would be like, where, like I'm gonna, so instead of asking where should I tickle, I would say I'm gonna tickle your, and then I would
Mhm.
model like tummy, and then I would tickle their tummy, and then I would start pausing for the child to select like,
Mm.
arms, and I'd tickle their arms, legs, I'd tickle their legs. So now we're actually having an interaction. The child's going to choose the body part and I'm going to tickle, but it's within this predictable framework of this is almost like our play gestalt. This is how this game's going to go. So they really do want to interact with you.
I love that. And then you're really focusing on that engagement and the experience sharing, and that's going to drive that motivation to continue communicating. I think that's fantastic. I love that example. Okay, so what advice would you give to teachers working with Gestalt language processors and in inclusive classrooms? And do you see a lot of teachers that know about this?
I don't know which teachers know. I know at special schools they are learning more.
Mhm.
So if your child's going to like an autism school, they might be learning more about this. But what my advice would be is learn the language that that child will understand, really be in contact with the parents because you might say, time to go potty, and like the child has no idea what you're saying because at home the mom says like let's go pee. You don't know what they say at home, and that's really going to matter. So knowing the
Yeah.
gestalts that they use at home or vice versa, if they are following you at school and at home they're not, then it's really good for the parents to know what gestalts you're using at school. So keeping that conversation open. If they say something at school, like let the parents know they said this because then the parent can understand what that child is reciting for the rest of the afternoon. So knowing that, so sharing information would be number one important thing. The next important thing would just be that I mean, I would say most important is interaction. So I've
Mhm.
been to a lot of preschools where the child is walking around in circles, mumbling to themselves without interaction. So I would say,
Mhm.
like, think of things that you can do that are predictable at school to involve that child in, and then think of the language that you modeled. And again, let the parents know what that was, so that they can carry that
Mhm.
over at home. And the
Mhm.
third thing, the last thing is if the child says, you know, like, let me think, like they might, yeah, like, I want to go home. That doesn't
Right.
mean they want to go home necessarily. It might be a gestalt for, I don't like what you did, or give that toy back to me, or, go away for a second. You don't know what that child meant to say, so don't take it at face
Mhm.
value.
Mhm. And that's where you just have to really be a detective and try to kind of slow down and process and think through what they might be communicating.
Mhm.
And I think you would know that, correct me if I'm wrong, would you know that if they're repeating that same phrase, but it's in a couple different environments, or you're kind of seeing that phrase commonly used, that might be a clue that that's something that they've learned, but it doesn't necessarily mean it applies to that specific, it somewhat applies, but it's not necessarily that direct moment.
Absolutely. And I think especially like those negative, like all done, all done. Like I have a client who will just say, all done, all done, all done, all done. And that
Hmm.
might mean, hey, this is a little hard. Let's make
Right.
it a little easier. Let's maybe not just abandon the whole activity. So just keep
Yes.
in mind like what that child needs. Are they regulated? Are they not regulated? Can we incorporate AAC in the classroom? That's another big one. It can really be a support to have any type of AAC. So I would definitely encourage that as well.
Fantastic. Oh, I love that. And I think it's important to talk about resources. So I know you mentioned, that there isn't a specific diagnosis. So where do people find out about this if they want to learn more about Gestalt language processing?
Well, I was trained on the meaningful speech course, which was great. So I definitely recommend that. There's a lot of social media that you can follow, like Boho Speech and the Meaningful Speech. They have their social media as well, where you can watch example videos of what their sessions might look like. And I think that gives you a lot of insight as well. And then I would say that finding a speech therapist who at least knows enough about Gestalt language processing to be considering your child's unique profile and their needs is what's essential. So again, like if they're not 100% certified, I don't know if that's essential. It's just that they do have to know that your child's language is meaningful and there's these different stages, and they need to know how to support your child in moving through it.
Fantastic. And now, I know you had mentioned previously that there is a directory on the Meaningful Speech website as well, so they can find out if somebody's been at least trained in that.
Yes.
Is that right?
You can look at the directory and you can see if there's someone in your area or virtual.
Yeah. Right. And as we talked about previously before we got started, there's other ways where maybe somebody's trained within their clinic setting that still can be meaningful, as long as they have the awareness and the knowledge and the mindset of understanding.
100%. I know that with my daughter, if I worked with a speech therapist who wanted to teach her like the traditional manner of just like, let's label these flashcards or I really don't think she would have gotten very far. So I would definitely encourage those to ask their therapist, do you know about Gestalt language processing? And again, like a lot of companies are doing their own trainings, they're teaching within their clinic setting. So again, there's a lot of therapists out there that are trying to get trained.
Fantastic. I love it. And hopefully getting this information out there will encourage others as well to look into this training. So I'd love to have you share how people can find you as well, if they'd like to find out what clinic you're working for and get that information, and maybe even, if you know the Meaningful Speech website as well, you could mention that too.
Yeah. So you can find me in two different places. One is I work for a company called RL Speech, and you can, if you just Google like RL Speech therapygroup.com, you'll find us, and we really specialize in AAC. So if you're looking for getting your child a free funded device, we can support, especially if you're in California, through the regional centers, but also in other areas as well, a completely virtual company. I also have my own private practice called Dynamic Expression, and I do like to post videos of my daughter and like of her progress. So you can see that at dynamic_expression.slp, and that's on Instagram. And so there's a lot of places that you can find me and other qualified therapists for Gestalt language processing.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Lauren. This was so informative. I feel like I learned a lot. I've heard you speak before, but I appreciated hearing it again and learning again. It filled in some holes for me for sure. And I'm excited to get this information out there. And I just thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was great.
I'm dancing on the edge again. The wind is calling my name. I'm dancing on the edge again. This time I'm not looking back, babe. You can change me, you can tell me down. I'll be echoes in every place I find. I break the molds with rebels mind. I'm a hurricane of free, born mind.
The information provided on this podcast is for general informational purposes only. The content shared is based on the experiences, opinions, and perspectives of the hosts and their guests and should not be construed as medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment recommendations. The discussions and topics covered are intended to foster understanding and awareness of autism therapies, but are not a substitute for professional medical guidance. Before making any decisions regarding therapies or treatments, we strongly encourage you to consult with a qualified healthcare provider who can provide personalized recommendations based on your unique circumstances. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge and agree that the hosts, guests, and producers are not responsible for any consequences, damages, or outcomes arising from the use or application of any information during the show.